Well, here we go. It is politically speaking, and for those of you who have been in the Now and Next feed from time to time, we launched this new series to deal with the politics of Canada, the politics of the United States. They're also intertwined of late, and everything that's going on both sides of the border. So we thought we should resurrect something out beyond On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. So here we go. Today, was the worst kept secret. The election's going to happen April the 28th. The Prime Minister making the announcement at Rideau this afternoon. And all three major party leaders have had their say. John Wright, I know you were called upon, and I saw you on CP24, kind of carving through all the entrails of what does all of this mean. And I think interesting to me is that we looked at the speeches of all three major party leaders. I'm not even going to get into, I don't even know what they were trying to do with the Green Party today. It was kind of hilarious. But the messaging was really interesting. Donald Trump was front and center in all three, but the tone and the approach in all three was remarkably distinctive.
Yeah, so the first person to speak was Pierre Poilievre, and off the top talked about in broad terms that Canada would never be a 51st state, that he would take on Trump. He was best to do that. But so it was a bit short. And then the rest of the campaign promises flowed from there, which is what we're usually used to. Now, from a polling perspective, there really are two parts to it when you ask people what the issues are in this country. The first part is for those people who are voting Conservative and many others, it is about tabletop issues. It's about the economy. It's about getting the cost of living and all the things that Pierre Poilievre has been talking about. So there clearly was a decision. It said, you know what, regardless of Donald Trump, there's a whole lot of people who are following us because we're talking about the things you've talked about for the last 18 months. So we're going to say it. We're going to put Donald Trump first, but the next of the 8/10 of what we're going to say is going to be about that and how it contrasts with Mr. Carney and the government. Mr. Carney stepped out, and it was pretty much the opposite. It was 8/10 about Donald Trump and stronger Canada. And that is the strength of where the Liberals are. There's not much beyond that I saw. I mean, in many ways, there were two parts to what he said about the domestic agenda. And that is all the tariffs are going to come down by July the 1st. We've got the carbon tax. But then he started talking about the middle class. And we've seen advertisements in the last 24 hours about that. And it just struck me that this was Trudeau 2.0 lodged into a bigger speech about Trump. Okay, so there was that. Jagmeet Singh, the problem with the NDP is that they really are not part of the ballot question, because ultimately, the ballot question is about Donald Trump. So Jagmeet Singh started thanking people about all the stuff that he's done, thanking them for their support, but going through a litany of, I got you this on dental care, and I got you this and this and this, and it's really not, I mean, they're not going to vote for you to thank you for what you did. But I was a bit surprised that it wasn't more forceful. I mean, the Trump stuff came later, but I personally would have started with, we face unprecedented times, and we as workers have to stick together. A union thrust to all of this. It says, yes, we're going to, we've done a whole bunch of stuff, but the reality is that in the days going ahead, our jobs are going to be threatened. The steel workers are going to be threatened. The aluminum workers are going to be threatened. The car workers and all of that. There's a natural gravity for them to go to, and he didn't do it. Yeah. So effectively what's happened is you get the Liberals and the Conservatives lined up for the choice, and then you get the NDP sitting at about 10%. Now, polling-wise, the Liberals are either tied or slightly leading, or you get the Conservatives slightly leading in a couple of others. So they're very, very close, but that's where we go. And then you have to look regionally and see differences there.
Yeah, I want to get to the polls, and the 338 numbers are really interesting. I want to get your take on that. But here's what I heard. I heard that Jagmeet Singh, to your point, came out and was trying to say, for the most part, the Liberals pretty much took all of our great ideas.
Even before Donald Trump started his greedy trade war, times were tough. And we fought to make things better for you and your family. Paid sick days and laws to protect you at work, that was us. Dental care. Dental care, so you don't have to choose between living in pain and buying groceries. That was us. Pharmacare, so you can afford the medicine your doctor prescribes. That was us. Because we believe that the promise of Canada belongs to all.
And the problem with that is that, of course, the Liberals came out yesterday or 2 days ago and expanded the dental care plan, and now they really do own it, and they've made it available to more Canadians. And I will say that based on the conversations I've heard various pollsters talk about, including yourself, is that it's not so much that people didn't like the programming that the Liberals were offering. They just didn't like Trudeau. He was tired. They were fed up with him. Even the Liberals were tired and fed up with him. So, for Carney to come out and, as you say, kind of cut some of the same grass doesn't really surprise me, because I think there must have been some inside research that said people like the dental care plan and the pharmacare plan and the child care plan and the child tax benefit. They like those things. So let's not around with them. Let's make sure that we're on that same track. We got Trudeau out the door, and that's where we begin this race.
Yeah, I mean, the Trudeau factor was so huge. It took the party down to about 16 to 18% in the polls. And at that stage, you're dealing with Trudeau Liberals. The natural state for the Liberal Party hovers around 26 to 30%. So they were way down. As soon as Trudeau left, you suddenly saw it, like a sponge cake kind of come up to about 26 to 30. And then as the, Carney factor got into play and the new candidates come on board for the convention, it started to rise through there. And we also had, of course, the real threat starting from the president almost on a daily basis. So they've sprung up in the polls. As I said, it's a matter of syllables and emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
You've got both parties are effectively almost saying the same thing in terms of what they're going to do with Trump. But below that, on the economy and what they plan to do is quite different, right? It's significantly different. The thing, though, is that the ballot question is Trump. I think all of us agree that, if we wake up on the morning that we're supposed to go to vote, and I predict a very high turnout for this, if Trump says something at 8 o'clock in the morning that reverberates through this country, it will affect the outcome of the election. There's no question. Forget about foreign interference on social media. We'll just get it straight there. But I think that's that. So the NDP are kind of, the little brother who's downstairs playing with his toys. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but it's just they're out of the room at the moment. They're not dealing with the adult stuff compared to the choice between the Conservatives and the Liberals. We also saw today the Green Party, which is a non-entity in this race, as it has been for many years. What I found fascinating was Quebec and Alberta. Quebec is, the Parti Québécois has always been about the independence and give us a strong voice in Ottawa. The problem nowadays, though, in Quebec is people are concerned about what Trump's going to do, and they've bound together in this Canada First policy, right? It's not about, we want to send them to Ottawa to have our bidding. It's really a lot of people there are saying, we want to vote for someone who's going to hold the country together like other parts. So that's created a different dynamic in Quebec. The other one is Danielle Smith. I mean, God knows. I mean, she's already challenged the prime minister this past week. She said earlier on that she would not, she wants to go her own way with Alberta. All of her social media now is about her and Alberta first. So while the rest of us are trying to save the country, she's trying to look after Alberta. But they played a recording on Breitbart that she done where she effectively says that that Pierre Poilievre is in sync with Trump. That is his mainstay, and that he's in sync with the times and what is said there. You got to think, with it playing today, that clip is going to be cycled into almost every Liberal ad that you can get going. So, it really is going to be about, the ballot question will be about holding our country together, and the main character will probably be Trump. But now we've got these regional players, and particularly Daniel Smith, who will pop up during the course of this campaign and say things and probably play to the advantage of the Liberals, not the Conservatives.
Yeah, it was interesting. And during the scrum with Carney, I forget which reporter brought it up, but the question was around, how do you distinguish yourself, or how do you actually associate the Conservatives with MAGA, was basically the tone of the question. And Carney got at the language that's being used and has been used before. So to some degree, I agree with you. Danielle Smith is going to be a real albatross for Pierre Poilievre. But in his opening, I mean, he wanted to go back. I thought it was surprising that he didn't, want to refocus more than he actually did. But listen to the language in this clip that he uses and tell me it's not MAGA.
10 years of Liberals hiking taxes and blocking resource projects has pushed $500 billion to the United States, given us the worst growth in the entire G7. And all of this was before the tariffs of Donald Trump. What's more, our nation is more divided than ever before because the liberal, radical, post-national, borderless, and globalist ideology has weakened our nation. Now, desperate for a fourth term, Liberals have replaced Justin Trudeau with his economic advisor and hand-picked successor, Mark Carney. But a Liberal is a Liberal is a Liberal. It's the same old Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal advisors, the same Liberal elites, the same broken Liberal promises of the last 10 years. We cannot afford another lost Liberal decade.
The globalist, borderless, radical, all of that language is just heat from, it might as well come out of Truth Social.
Yeah, and it's been used now for 18 months. So is the word woke many times, and so has, some of the policies where Pierre Poilievre went up north, and in order to pay for the Northern Defense system that he was proposing put in, it would be to cut programs, in fact, that were for foreign aid. So there are echoes of this that are going to be used, but I do come back to this and say that it's a very different agenda. There are people who are part of the Conservatives' vote tally at the moment, which you only need 37% to get a majority in this country. And if you're neck and neck, what you want to do is hold. You don't want them to go down. The question is whether or not there is a bit of strategic voting at the end of this campaign where people say, well, it looks like the Liberals are going to get the vote. I think it's safe for me to go back and park with the NDP. If the Liberals lose anything in that, it's disastrous. But in order to get a majority, the Conservatives, because of the efficiency of the non-efficiency of their vote, they have to get more than the Conservatives. They have to be ahead by at least 4 points. And to explain that is pretty simple. You can get 70 to 80% support in the province of Alberta, but you've only got so many seats, right? So it pushes the numbers up when it comes to polling, but you're not getting any more seats. The Conservatives have to be winning well in Ontario. They have to be making inroads in British Columbia. They hold it at the moment. They've got to be Saskatchewan and Alberta for sure. But they've also got to pick up seats in the Maritimes. They've got to do okay in Quebec, but they've got to pick up seats in other places, whereas the Liberals don't have that challenge. So right now in the province of Ontario, where the Conservatives need to be running further ahead, they're actually dead tied. So, you may be looking at a line that says 37-37 with the latest polls, and some people might be going, that's a dead heat. But if you get into the seat modeling, the Liberals are much further ahead.
Yeah. And I was just looking at the updated 338 projections, and that was just done today. Yeah. And right now, their projections got the Liberals at 178 seats. That's more than 20 than they got right now at dissolution. And you're right. I mean, you just painted the picture that's pretty much described on this map. Ontario, the Liberals are leading. They're pretty much tied in BC. Obviously, the Tories are way out in front in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba's tied. Yep. Quebec, bit of a mix. They got a real mix there. And Atlantic Canada seems to have been revived for the Liberals. So it's not an accident that the Prime Minister is in Newfoundland, Labrador tonight.
Yeah, and they need that desperately. And then Sean Fraser, who left the immigration portfolio and gone back, I mean, he's probably going to run for the premiership of Nova Scotia. But what brought down Atlantic Canada. It was in part even the finance minister. Remember when she was in Prince Edward Island, she talked about, how we all have to cut things out of our lives, and she had running shoes and using transit and all that sort of stuff. It wasn't something that was able to revive them. Let's be clear, Trudeau had done his time, and the Conservatives started to come up in the polls, and the Liberals were dropping in the polls in about the last 2.5 weeks that he was at the helm. And the reason was we kept seeing him all the time, and it was more and more and more of him, visiting, in Europe and then coming back here. People don't like Justin Trudeau. They don't like his voice. They don't like the sound of him. And as a result, the Conservatives started to rise. That's why we see here in the clip you just played, Poilievre, who's effectively saying, hey, this is the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau. It just has a different person running it. Nothing's changed, folks. Yeah. It's a liberal is a liberal is a liberal. So they're going to run on that. But you and I know what the ballot question is going to be about. It's going to be about who's best to lead the country against the onslaught that may be coming from the United States. And those tariffs will come into effect on April the 2nd. And they will affect companies. And plus, we also have the Chinese now that are affecting canola oil and the fisheries and a bunch of other things. So as fast as Mark Carney can pivot and ask that all the trade barriers in Canada be dropped so that we can start trading amongst ourselves, there's going to be this double whammy that hits us like a tsunami, especially from the United States. I think we all thought, Dave, that Donald Trump there was a means to an end, meaning negotiating, a treaty at the, short term, threatening to bring in these tariffs. He tweeted today on Truth Social, April 2nd is Liberation America Day. He intends to keep them. He believes that tariffs are going to liberate America. And as a result, there is no negotiation. There might be with Daniel Smith on some things. But frankly, we're about to get the boat in the middle of the ocean is about to get hit by a wave.
Yeah, well, and I think that the focus internally on the interprovincial trade barriers, et cetera, and both Poilievre and Carney are saying the same thing essentially. One economy, not 13, et cetera. And I think people are buying into that. You're hearing the premiers come out of that meeting on Friday, pretty much in step with few exceptions. They're at least talking seriously about action. They're not just talking seriously about talking, and that's a difference. So to your point, I'm not sure we're going to be in a place where we can be prepared for what is going to happen by focusing on the United States, because the Americans are going to go through what we're going through and maybe even worse. So there's going to be a second wave here of effect based on how their economy is just generally hurt and weakened. So to the extent that we're going to have to do something now, get the ground and hold on tight, I don't know what the bright metaphor is, but it's coming.
Yeah, but just think the amount of change that the world is now going through.
Mm-hmm.
We're having to scramble to find new relationships, whether it be Australia and New Zealand out in the Pacific, or whether it's the European Union to try and have negotiated trade and to open it up. Like, all of these regions are feeling the same thing. Next, defense. We're all scrambling, and we've now got the Australians involved with Canadians up north, and in looking at sovereignty, helping us. And at the same time, we are saying we'll review where the F-35s are, and maybe even look to Europe. Trump came out and said the most astonishing thing on Thursday, and that was, we're going to probably make a fighter jet that's about 10% less effective for our allies, because you never know when they might turn on us and have our same equipment. Like, the world is upside down. And then we've got, of course, Ukraine and Russia and everything else to follow. So it is incredible to think that since December the 31st, when the old world existed, that we are only a couple of, 3 months into this. We are already bringing down barriers across the country, reconfiguring our defense partnerships and the equipment that we may or may not have, and opening up doors to Europe and to Asia to try and deal with new trade relationships and to make sure that we are strong against what's coming tariffs from the South. That's in 3 months. We're moving what normally would have been, as you and I have tracked this sort of stuff for years, this would have been something a prime minister would have taken a year to do. It would have been a tour. It would have been discussions with premiers. It would have been all kinds of other things going to effect. The fact that Quebec Early on in this process, the premier said, you know what, we can do this with alcohol. Oh my God, what's next? A pipeline?
Mm-hmm.
It is remarkable how we are changing this country in such a short period of time. We don't even realize it. It's just happening.
Well, Legault even said, he wasn't equivocal in saying we're not going to have a pipeline. It was we could probably even talk about it. That shift in and of itself is monumental.
Well, and it may be that because of the tariffs and because of the impact that it has on our economy, that instead of the blockage, or the quote bloc as a political party, stops their protests against some kind of a pipeline coming through there. We don't know what our economy is going to look like. Mm-hmm. We certainly know that Alberta, here is obstreperous. That's a decent word, because it's all about Alberta first, where the rest of us are trying to fight for Canada first. So that will be a constitutional issue. But in the meantime, what Daniel Smith says during the course of this campaign may have a reverberation. And it may influence, not just the West, but it may also influence Quebec and what they want to do. So
entirely.
I don't know. There's no predictability in this campaign. The closest you can get is probably the 1988 campaign with Brian Mulroney. And, we were dealing with free trade. And we even had one of those ads back then, which was the erasing of the border. Mm-hmm. But the only threat we had then was the raging grannies, which were, protesting Brian Mulroney everywhere he went. We didn't have, and in the free trade deal, it actually was a judge in the middle of Saskatchewan, I think, or Manitoba, who finally said something about free trade and said, you know what, this is what it actually means. There was a judge that turned the nature of that campaign. I think, Dave, we're going to deal with this up and down. The pulse will be the pace of the campaign based on what Donald Trump says. And at the end of the day, the ballot question will still be, which of the two major party characters is the best to hold the country together and take us forward? And this could be right down to the last day, but I suggest that we're going to have probably in excess of 70% turnout of the polls. And if that's the case, this country is going to move in a direction that is going to be hopefully a mandate for somebody to run it in the face of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and off the top, we noted the difference in the tone, and I think the Prime Minister coming out from Rideau Hall, gave all the explanations as to why he was calling the election, but then distinguished himself from Pierre Poilievre.
It's easy to be negative about everything when you've never fixed anything. It's easy to be negative about everything when you've never built anything, when you've never had to make a payroll. But negative slogans aren't solutions. Anger isn't action. Division isn't strength. Negativity won't win a trade war. Negativity won't pay the rent or the mortgage. Negativity won't bring down the price of groceries. And negativity won't make Canada strong.
And it's a point that I keep hearing people make over and over again. I want to have this conversation. I want to deal with the issues, but can we do it without the outrage? There's enough to be frightened of right now, rather than, and that's a problem that, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are going to have. He's the bulldog, and it's not likely to have the bulldog be the leader of the party.
Yeah, well, up to this point, Canadians have wanted somebody who is going to have a conversation. But remember, there are 37% of the public right now. If you go by the latest Nanos polls or Abacus or Innovative Research, they're basically neck and neck. So, I mean, there's a portion of people that don't want Mark Carney and the Liberals to get back in. But the tone's shifted. You couldn't have a more dramatic tone difference from even Justin Trudeau. It's calm. It's a different kind of tone. You can say right now that the two stump speeches that those two leaders gave today, we will now hear almost everywhere for the next week. And they'll get better at it. And it will become extemporaneous. And the advertising will support it. And the attack ads will now come against Mark Carney about how sneaky he is and, how we can't trust him and a whole series of things around that. It's going to be fascinating because one is, keep the land strong and we're in this together. And the other side is we need to change. And we need to change from the old to renew And that renewal will bring us to the point where we can have this discussion with the United States and renew our country. I think the other leaders are, just as I said at the outset, downstairs playing with toys. This is now the two major parties in this country. We're going to be looking at and making a decision between them in the final days of the campaign. And it will rest on the shoulders of Canadians to choose between them based on what they hear from the United States and what they feel now when those tariffs come in.
Yeah. Well, again, we just went through the Ontario campaign, and for the most part, you and I could have said this is how it's going to end pretty much when the writ was drawn up. There's not a chance that
Nope.
I would put any money or a bet on any of this right now.
The only thing that I would say that is the same is when we looked at the polling in Ontario, there was great dissatisfaction with many of Ontario's issues: healthcare, education, a whole series of issues. But what cut through was 53% of people who effectively said, but the real issue that I'm concerned about is the threat south of the border. So no matter what you said about other things, 15% of the public bit their tongue and voted for Doug Ford, even though they really didn't want to. That is the issue for the Conservatives. Mm-hmm. It may be that they agree with them on the kitchen table and that things aren't as good in their pocketbook, but that's not the issue to them. The overarching issue is who's going to protect me, and it actually is the same question coast to coast, even in the province of Quebec, where normally it's not the question. It's who's going to look out for my interest in Ottawa, for Quebec. Yeah. Now it's, are we in this together because we feel really threatened? And so it's similar to Ontario, but it's on a more national scope.
Yeah, Jean Chrétien quipping that he wanted to give Donald Trump the Order of Canada for making us all so united. So
yeah, we're kind of there. You can be united. You can be united in bliss or in misery. It doesn't matter.
That's right.
We'll see where things go in the next few days.
All right, John Wright. Thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure, Dave. Take care.
Good to talk to you. All right. That is Politically Speaking. It's all part of our Now and Next offering, and we're going to drop it in the On the Ledge feed as well, just so you all can take full advantage, and we'll be in that feed from time to time throughout the campaign.